Dr. Jazz.
But Becca, I'll just jump in, not to take too much of your time. But you know, we wrote on email that you're preparing something new this year, and I wanted to ask you if you can already share. You know, I think every album by you that I listened has kind of like a story, or at least like a common thread. Like, what's happening on this one, and when it's coming out, and what was the story behind creating it, and with whom, and
Yeah, absolutely. So this upcoming album, it's solo. It was recorded right here.
oh wow,
My microphones are off their thing right now, but I was sitting right here when I made the whole thing right in this very spot. And I started writing the music while I was pregnant with my first daughter, who you might be able to hear playing in the stairwell right now. She's 2 almost. And also during that pregnancy, I found out that my mom had a terminal cancer diagnosis, and there was just this very strong theme of like motherhood going on in my creative mind, like it was. And then over the course of the next year, I became a mother and lost a mother. And then about a year after that, I found out I was going to be a mom again. So it's been this like, throughout the whole experience of making the record, it's been a very strong theme of motherhood and loss, but also beauty and a lot of like transformation, grief, all kinds of fun stuff. And so the process of writing and recording the music became like a means of survival at one point. I mean, it was really, for a while, it was like excruciating. And I wasn't sure that it would end up being solo, because as a record maker, I have a tendency towards layering and adding something just popped up, I'm closing it, and adding voices and different like layers of intricate counter melodies and string parts and stuff like that. But on this one, it really felt to serve the songs and the concept and the like vulnerability of the experience best, to just show the bare minimum of what was happening. So I committed to that. And it's the first time I've made a record that is just one guitar and one voice, and they were recorded live together. So instead of recording the guitar and then stopping and doing the voice over top, everything was recorded live together.
So basically there is no overdubbing, not even backing vocals or stuff, or
Nothing.
Really? Oh man.
Yeah, which was actually more of a challenge. It sounds like that's a way to simplify, but it was actually more of a challenge for me.
Wow. Okay. Oh, looking forward to this. I mean, there's on YouTube like some footage of you doing stuff solo, which is beautiful. But like you said, yeah, I love the layering always on all your records. It's like that's the amazing part.
Oh, thank you.
But I mean, I wanted to ask you, like, how do you write in general? Where do ideas come with you, like lyrically and musically? Like I fell in love with the Regina record. I don't know. I think I played that when my wife was pregnant all the time. I don't know why that record somehow made sense. And I know every, song and the layers, and I kept listening but in general, like, what's your process when coming up with ideas? Do you write down like small snippets or?
Well, thank you, first of all. That I appreciate that. Yeah, writing for me is it's varied. The process is varied, especially as I get older, because I really thrive off of experimentation and the feeling of openness in my writing and early on when I was just starting to write, I would say that most often it would start with the guitar and finding some sort of like um vibe on the guitar and then improvising melodies until I found something that I liked, and then maybe some vowels and like gibberish would come through, and then finally lyrics. But that is not I would say that's not my regular way anymore. I don't think I have a regular way anymore. In fact, now I think I'm very committed to finding what the entry point wants to be in any given song. So, for example, with Regina, which you mentioned, that album was all inspired by the word queen, or the idea of a queen in as like literal or loose. I wanted to go with that and just sort of using that as a springboard for creativity. And so, for example, the song Mercury
Oh, yeah.
was a setting of interview quotes from Freddie Mercury from Queen. So it was like that was the entry point was
I love that one, yeah.
literally me going on online and Googling like Freddie Mercury interview quotes and then sort of like puzzling together song lyrics from that. And then whereas the song Venus from Regina started with a feeling, like in a there was an emotional struggle that I was going through from some turmoil in a relationship, and then this idea, this little earworm that opens up the song, the was the entry point to that song.
So cool.
So, oh, thank you.
Yeah.
So it depends on the song. It depends like where the inspiration is. And I've tried the deeper that I go into my life as a songwriter, the more I try to follow where the muse is kind of like inviting me in and follow that inspiration.
But you never start with lyrics, or you always start with music? I mean,
I do sometimes. Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do start with lyrics, and sometimes I'll even start with I can show you.
oh yeah,
My
please.
computer will let me, like sometimes I'll start with fragments. Like, do you see all these little pieces of paper
Oh
on my
yeah.
wall?
Oh yeah.
That was
Cool. Yeah.
that was me brainstorming lyrics and song titles and album ideas for the new album that I just finished. So it could be like I might sit down for 30 minutes and journal and then go through and underline bits that I like and do it in sort of a puzzly way, or I might do it more like I might have a melody in my mind and then the first lyric that comes out is already set in the melody. There's a million different ways,
Yeah. Yeah. It's I mean, for me, I studied poetry, American poetry and translation, and writing music. For me, it's really easy. Like, to come up with a ballad, like, okay, sure, I know the tools, right? But just for lyrics, I'm always like, even though I know poetry, to write it, I'm like, shit, this sounds so cliche or whatever. And like, that's why I'm interested how you come up with, really different ideas. It's not like you said, Mercury and stuff. I love that. Yeah. Beautiful.
Well, they're very close neighbors and sometimes one and the same. That's cool that you studied American poetry. That's awesome.
Oh, I love it. It's what keeps us going always, take a Robert Greeley collection or Wallace Stevens, just read one and they're like, oh, okay, that's nice. But You mentioned when did you start composing, actually? When did you start writing your first compositions?
I mean, I guess it depends on where you draw the line between songwriting and composing.
Okay.
And some could say that they're one and the same. And if that's the case, then, you know, as like a little kid, I was making up songs. But like when I really started to write songs that had accompaniment and harmony and structure and, you know, accompanied by guitar and stuff like that, I would say I was like 12.
Wow, okay.
Making up songs on the guitar and then performing them and for my like camp talent show and stuff like that. And then when I was in high school, I was studying classical guitar, but I was singing in a rock band with my brother, and I would write songs for that band. And then in college, I studied vocal jazz performance at the New School.
Okay.
But I really at the New School, when you tick all the boxes and get your primary classes done, like, you know, theory, ear training, whatever, you then they say you're out of proficiency, which means you can do whatever you want. And so once I was out of proficiency, I really sought out and focused on as many composition classes and also sort of like using the voice more as an instrument rather than sort of the straight ahead approach. And so yeah, during those 4 years, I definitely honed my composing and arranging craft quite a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. What got you excited actually for this sort of music? I mean, you know, you mix everything like jazz and singer-songwriting and classical and, you know, it's all there. But like, what got you excited actually for what you do now? Like, I mean, was there like, I don't know, you heard Johnny Mitchell or someone or?
No one thing, but I see it more like this like labyrinth or something that kept wrapping back around. And I'd like, you know, you go through and you see an old version of yourself and you're like, oh, hey again. But there's like, you know, in the beginning, I came up in a musical family, and I would say that the kind of music that we made as a family is in some ways closer to what I'm doing now than jazz or classical was. But also when we were growing up, we my dad's a classical composer, and we were performing his operas and musicals and stuff like that, and it's all intertwined. But during my years studying classical guitar, I had my eye on jazz. Jazz was like a rebellion or an outlet that was so different from the classical repertoire. And then during my years studying jazz, I had my eye on original music and whatever that meant to me at the time. So it's sort of like whatever I'm doing at the time is a way of like pushing up against what came before, you know. But it comes back around. Like you know, I find myself falling in love again with the things that I resisted 10 years before or whatever, you know.
What about specifically like singers? Did you go like through phases, like listening to specifically to someone or who were like your influences, let's say? I mean, I guess David Crosby is there probably somewhere, but you know, like still, like what were your phases like regarding that?
Actually, it's funny. I used to tease David a lot about this because we were so close musically, and I had and have so much respect for him as a musician, as a songwriter, as a guitarist, as a vocalist. but I didn't know, I didn't really know who he was when I met him. I knew his name and I knew his band. I knew like, off the top of my head, I could like think of a song that Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young did. And then after we started writing songs together, he invited me to a show in New York, a Crosby, Stills and Nash show. And I was sitting in the audience and I was like, oh my gosh, I do know all these songs. I didn't realize like this was the person that was singing the high part of that, and through the years of, I think we met in, I want to say 2014. And so during those 9 years or whatever that we crossed over on this planet, I really did learn so much about what he offered here, but during my formative years, we didn't listen to very like, when I was growing up, we didn't listen to very like normal music. Like my husband used to listen to Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young in the car with his family all the time, and the Beatles and stuff like that. We were listening to like Irish folk music and Frank Zappa and like sort of obscure classical composers. And anyway, it was a lot of like world music and stuff that a lot of like interesting folk. Bela Fleck and the Flecktones was a big one in our household. But then when I was a teenager, and even like early teens, I did get very heavily into Joni Mitchell's early stuff in high school, and Bjork and Tori Amos and Radiohead, Fiona Apple, Elliott Smith, Nick Drake. And then also during early teens and high school, I was on a big jazz kick. Vocalists like Ella Fitzgerald, Sarah Vaughan, Nina Simone, Bobby McFerrin, I was really excited by. And then also like great composers like Thelonious Monk and Charles Mingus and Duke Ellington, Billy Strayhorn. And I would, I'd get really into there was like a Ken Burns jazz box set that I like listened to until it was skipping, just anything I could get my hands on. I was really obsessed with like the whole jazz pedagogy. I don't know. But I went kind of deep during those years with all kinds of stuff, hip hop, folk, jazz and indie rock and all kinds of stuff. So it's hard to say any one, but I would say like the longest standing obsessions, like people who I put on a pedestal of like, wow, this person keeps reinventing themselves, and each reinvention is so authentic somehow. Like Joni Mitchell is definitely one of those. They're like, they reinvent themselves faster than you can even comprehend. And also Bjork is like, and Joni Mitchell, I'm catching up because she was doing it way before I was born. But whereas Bjork, I feel like I'm like going through it with her, and each time she does something new, she's like 20 years ahead of what I can comprehend,
Yeah, she's amazing. Yeah. No, but Johnny also. I remember hearing Kajira the first time with Jocko and Larry Carlton and all those guys. I was like, man, what is this? And it's crazy
totally
stuff. Yeah. And then you go back and forward. Yeah, I love that. Amazing. You mentioned David Crosby. I mean, we kind of stumbled upon him. I wanted to ask you about him later also, but like, how come you connected with him? What's the story behind you hooking up actually? And
yeah, so over the year, I think it was February 2014 or 15, something like that. Snarky Puppy did Family Dinner Volume 2, and Michael League asked me if I wanted to be one of the guest artists on that, and I said, heck yeah. And there are a lot of really cool guest artists that year who I've like continued collaborating with since that beautiful serendipitous meeting. Like David, I've had a lot of great collaborations and writing and touring with Jacob Collier. I've done some writing and performing with Lewis Cole and Genevieve and Genevieve Artadi, and also Laura Mvula sang on a song on Regina, and I met her that day. I met Michelle Willis that day, who became a bandmate both in the Lighthouse band with David Crosby and also in my own band, the Becca Stevens band. And yeah, just it was like such a blast of new energy from that one experience. But specifically David, he and I think this story is also a testament to like his artistry and his unending hunger as an artist. Like he never, as he said, he never wanted to just turn on the smoke machine and play the hits. He was always looking for the next way to like really feed that creative hunger. And so, you know, he was definitely like the most famous person there, at least like amongst the American cats, you know. And he could have just like come in with a bodyguard right before he performed and then gotten in a limo and driven away or whatever. But he got there first thing in the morning, sat in the room where they were setting up the cameras and everything, and listened to every single rehearsal and was just so blown away by all the music that was happening. And during my rehearsal, he, between takes or between sections or whatever, he came up behind me and tapped me on the shoulder. And I turned around and I was like, "Hi, David." You know, I knew it was him. And he was like, "Can I curse on this?" I'm quoting him. So
yeah, sure. Go ahead.
He said, "You're fucking crazy." And I was like, "Thank you." And he
That's
said,
the best compliment.
He said, "We should write together." And I was like, "Okay." And at the time, I didn't realize how rare that was for him or how serious he was. Like, I was like, "Oh, what he says this to everyone." But sure enough, he wrote me an email following that experience and sent me like a folder of his lyrics.
Oh, wow.
And asked me to just pick one out that spoke to me and set it to music, which I did. And that song, which I call The Muse on Regina, and he called By the Light of Common Day, that song became really an entry point to what became the Lighthouse Band, because the recording of that on his album was me, Michelle, Michael, who produced that record, Michael League, and David, and he liked the sound of it. And so he decided that that would be the touring band for that record. And yeah, the rest is history.
Yeah. How did you guys write together when you said, like, how did that process go?
Yeah, I love that question because it is different depending on the collaboration. Like like every sort of like writing pair that I have is different. And I loved how we wrote together. I would say most often it happened in person, and it would start with usually a seed from David, and those seeds could be a really cool guitar idea in an alternate tuning, something he'd been kind of toying around with, and be like, you know, let's here, you take a turn or whatever. Or maybe even more often than that, it would be he just would have these like brilliant spurts of like lyrical genius, and it just come out of his brain and his mouth perfectly. And he just put it in a Word document, print it out, and throw it in a pile with like coffee stains, and, and then you pick up these golden lyrical nuggets. And then we would develop those. And then sometimes, actually, this was kind of one of my favorite things that would happen, it would start with a concept. So for example, if you've heard Vagrants of Venice on Here If You Listen,
Yeah.
the Lighthouse Band album.
Yep.
It started with almost like he had almost like a dream or a vision of what Venice would look like in sort of like this post-apocalyptic world where everything's underwater and people are sitting on the tops of like ancient ruins and fishing like overfished Venetian waters and burning like beautiful vintage furniture to keep warm. I mean, he was like he would just get on this like cinematic
Amazing, yeah.
I don't even know how to describe it. Was just like gold yarn flowing out of it. And his father was a cinematographer, and I often wonder if that kind of like influenced this way that he would be able to sort of like traverse these artistic visions. But he would just go and go and go and go and go, and I'm like typing furiously, capturing it as much as I can, and then it just would stop. And then oftentimes he'd lay down and take a nap, and then
Oh, wow.
I would then like pull all these pieces together and then start to put them over a guitar part or something. And then he'd wake up and I'd say, what do you think of this? And he'd be like, oh yeah, that's cool. No, I don't like that. I like the, and then it just, from there, it became, you know, like a back and forth.
Wow, that's so beautiful, man. Yeah, I mean,
Oh, thank you.
well, one of the greats, yeah, you got to work like hand in hand. I mean, that's, yeah, amazing. Did you
Yeah.
ever ask him like about the 60s and 70s, like how they worked? I mean, did he tell you stories and stuff? And
I mean, I heard a lot
probably
of
did.
stories. I tried
Yeah.
not to bug him with that too
Yeah, yeah.
much because that's what everybody else was doing.
Yeah.
And so I would end up hearing those stories just because that was like, you know, somebody would meet him for the first time, and that was like the first thing they wanted.
Hello, everybody.
Oh my gosh. Hold on one second.
Yeah,
My
sure,
phone
no
just
worries.
started talking. That was so weird. I think that was Marco Polo, and I don't know why it just started talking. That was so funny. My phone was off and in my pocket, and then it just started talking. But yeah, people would like meet him for the first time, or like fans would come on the tour bus and they immediately would want to know these stories that he'd already told a
Yeah.
thousand times, and I just like, I want to spare him, you know.
Yeah. No, it's smart. Yeah. I mean, I'm always when I'm also on tour, like with guys like older guys, then I let them. Sometimes I feel bad though that I didn't ask them, you know, like how was it? But then usually they
Yeah.
start talking, yeah. But it's just like I love this oral tradition in jazz, like
No,
this.
I mean, I feel like if yeah, I feel like if they want to share something, it'll
Yeah,
come
they will.
forward on its own, you know, and it's
Yeah.
and but usually people are more interested in talking about what is like inspiring them now.
No, yeah.
They want to be in the moment with you and talk about what they're doing now and what they want to do next, you know. And I think especially, you know, when you're on the road and in a tour bus, you're exhausted all the time, and like just being able to kind of settle into the moment with someone is very comforting, you know.
Yeah. You mentioned touring. How do you keep fresh on a tour and like stay, you know, that you're, especially as a band leader, you know, to be there, present the music, deal with promoters, deal with the fans, and but still give your 160% and like.
Yeah. I mean, you're not fresh. Adrenaline is your best friend. Drinking is your worst friend. But it, you know, it happens.
Sure.
Sleep is your best friend, but it's hard to come by, especially on my tours. I would say it was much easier to sleep on David tours, or when we were you know, on the road opening for Snarky Puppy, these tours where you can go to sleep on the bus
Yeah.
after a show finishes, and then wake up in the next place you're playing and then go to a hotel and sleep some more. Like that's luxurious. My tours were more like I would be, I'd perform till 11 or something, then go sit at the merch table till 12 or 1, and then, pack up, get back to the hotel at 1 or 2, and then wake up at 4 or 5 to go to the airport for a 6 or 7 a.m. flight, and then go straight to a hotel or sound check. And you get really serious about how to nap on the plane. You got your noise canceling headphones and your eye mask and your face mask, and you just have to like force yourself to go to sleep. But sometimes it's impossible. And then the adrenaline, which gets you through the performance, can also come back and bite you in the butt when you get back to the hotel, because then you're like, okay, time to go to sleep.
Yeah.
And then you're just like, boing, but it's really tricky, and it's very it's like it's inhuman at times, where you're it's just like it just drives you farther and farther into this like bad mental state, because you're on a roller coaster all the time. It's really not conducive to like solid mental health. And this was something that it took me 10 years of touring to realize, like, wow, this is not very healthy. And then I remember just before the pandemic thinking like, this isn't a sustainable business model, because it also doesn't make great money. And then it like slowly kills you. And then the world stopped, and all my gigs got canceled, March of 2020, whatever. But it's really hard is the answer. And so you have to love it. You have to want to do it, and you have to be able to like enjoy it for what it is, and see kind of like a bigger picture of like, by doing this, I'm growing this other thing.
Yep.
It is getting better, and eventually it will be more sustainable.
Yeah. No, it's funny. Like you mentioned all this. Like I remember some of my first tours, and you have this romantic idea, going to a Pat Metheny concert, and I saw him like 17 years old, and like, oh man, I want to do that. And then the harsh reality of finances and traveling and everything, and like, shit, man, that's it. It's nice, it's a privilege, but like you said, it's just like
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah, it's not so easy.
Oh yeah, and especially as a band leader, because you're responsible for the overhead. Whereas when you're a sideman, you know what you're going to make.
Easy.
You're being told where to be and what to play, and it's a little cozier, to like go and do that as a sideman. Like I felt like I was very well taken care of on David's tours, even though he allowed that and invited such a collaborative energy between the four of us. Like it felt like all of our band, but he was really the band leader, and we were taken care of. But yeah, like as the tours where you're the band leader, it's brutal.
Yeah.
It can be really hard during those first however many years it takes before you get to a place where things are a little cozier.
Yeah. How do you see in your eyes? How have you developed as a band leader? I mean, like, when you started, I guess, in the late 2000s and in New York and until now, I mean, was it heavier in the beginning, like to lead a band, to present the music, and how did that go actually for you, like becoming a band leader?
Yeah. I mean, I was really lucky. I guess I had I was either lucky or I made a good decision early on to choose the people who were in it for the long game, and who really prioritized like the process of collaborating, and like getting inside the music and taking time to kind of find the way with me. So early on, not only did that come through like in our rehearsals, I'd bring a song and like some vocal ideas and bass lines and like some weird demo with drum parts and stuff, and we'd like we'd really go through slowly and work it out together. So it came through musically, but also on the road. Like in the beginning, I was booking everything. We were going in my car, in my station wagon, with all of our instruments. And in those first couple of years, I would say, listen, guys, this doesn't make money yet. And I'm not making money anywhere else aside from like, I was like a receptionist at a jazz club, and I was like teaching Suzuki guitar or whatever to pay rent. And I was like, are you cool with like this business model where if I promise you, you won't spend a penny, you'll come out on the road, we'll play my music for 10 days or something, and you won't have to pay for a hotel room or any meals. And, I'll cover the gas, whatever. And that worked because of how it was like set up and how cool they were. That worked for a couple of years. Now I would never dream of doing that. We're adults now. They get their fee.
Sure.
I'm not gonna, if the show doesn't pay, I don't bring them. It's just like we all have like kids and stuff. But yeah, in those early years, that was how we toured at first. And then eventually, like that, I think we did our first show in 2005 or 6. And then
already,
in
wow, okay.
2010, 2010, I was singing on a Brad Mehldau commission at Carnegie Hall, and Brad's management was there, and they were looking for a artist sort of like me, and we started conversations, and that was when I got my first agency, and that gave a real boost and relief to that, like the touring process, because now I wasn't writing all those emails under my own name anymore. And a boost to the finances. And it's all, life is like, especially career life, it's in these like kind of this stairwell, this slow, well, at least my career, it's like a slow moving escalator. Sometimes it goes back down and then it goes back up, but it's just been this sort of like long game of commitment, and then also doing some sideman work and teaching and stuff on the side.
Yeah. How did all? I mean, I checked some of the records that I have you on, and like, there's like a huge amount of records between like 2007 and 2010. That must have been like a crazy period, and you starting leading your own band. And I'm like, how did all those stories happen? Were there like schoolmates from New School also, or like how did these connections happen?
Which ones are you thinking about in particular? I'm curious.
I mean, I have like the Travis Sullivan one, and Sam Sadigursky's The Words Project, and what else do I have? I mean, I checked some of the records I have you on today, like just like went through, and it was like, it's from that period, like quite a big pile. And so how did that process go for you? I mean,
well, I think of that period. So I graduated in 2007. And I made my first record with my band in 2007, put it out in 2008. It was called T by C. And I had that music on my MySpace page. And Brad Mehldau had that CD in his minivan in his car with his wife. They were listening to it because Sam Sadigursky had recommended it to them. I don't remember how Sam found out about me. And then Taylor Eigsty heard my music on my MySpace page and asked me to do some collaborating and recording stuff with him. I think that came out in 2010, the first record that I did with him, which was called Daylight at Midnight. But also just more broadly, and Bjorkestra, Travis Sullivan's Bjorkestra, that was that was a collaboration that I started even when I was still in college. So my I was like halfway through college. My theory teacher, Arun Luthra, was playing, I want to say like soprano sax in the orchestra. And he had put a flyer up on one of the like, cork boards at school, bulletin boards, um, telling people to come to this show. And I was, I saw the word Bjork and I was like, I'm there. And I got there and I didn't expect there to be a singer. And I was like, oh my gosh, I want this gig. And I went up to him the next day in class and I was like, I never do this, but listen, like if you ever need a sub, I know all that music, like give me a call. And a few months later he called me and he said, we need a sub. And she ended up leaving the band to focus on her own music and I got the gig. So that was a pretty cool experience to be like touring already with them even before I'd graduated college. It's so like I started to get experience with that. And I was touring with, at that time I was touring with a really great pianist, Elon Meller, too, who we made a record recently as well of like standards and stuff. And but yeah, I would say more broadly during that period, because I wasn't able to sustain myself financially as a songwriter, as a band leader, etc. It was a really fruitful time of saying yes to other things. And so I was like, during that time, I was really out there more as like a collaborator because I was saying yes to a lot. And that was like, that was really important to my career. And I recommend that when I'm like working with students who are asking, how do you balance this early on? And I think it's really important to like have a period where you're out there, your name is out there, you're showing up, you're like being professional and nice to be around and getting the job done beautifully. And then that can only create like a really strong foundation for what's to come,
Yeah, true. Yeah. Becca, not to take too much of your time, I just wanted to ask you, like, you being as a band leader still, also, like, what happened on Perfect Animal? For me, like, when I listen to your records, that one is then like, I don't know, it's something different, like musically, or what was going on there? Like, what's your feel if you look at your records? I mean, it's obviously it's good that we grow, right? But like for me, that one is like, wow, okay, above Weightless and the T1.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's like that escalator or the labyrinth or whatever metaphor you want to use. But T by C, I mean, I'll just give like a quick note about each one, and then Perfect Animal, I'll go a little deeper. But
Okay.
T by C was like, these were the songs that I'd written from the age of 16 through college. And I just was like, everything that I've written that I like, that I play with my band, we went into the studio, I produced it. I don't think I even knew to like write that in the liner notes. So it's just like, we just kind of figured it out in the studio. And then Weightless was more of a concept where it was like, this is music that I wrote over the course of a year for these four people, Jordan Perlson, Chris Tordini, and Liam Robinson. And I wrote very much with each of them in mind. And I wrote it so that each of these arrangements can be performed live. So it was like, we recorded everything live. I don't think there would have been like very, very few overdubs. If anything, there were like fixes. And Gretchen Parlato came in and sang on a couple of those songs, but otherwise it was just the four of us. And then Perfect Animal, leading into Perfect Animal, I was getting really into like indie pop and indie rock and records that were produced by guys like John Congleton, where I was starting to be like, how do you get into this world where things feel big and scary and layered and, and so my demos were already starting to kind of go in that direction. And like we've talked about in this conversation,
Yeah.
I have a tendency towards jumping to the opposite, pushing up against whatever I did before. So weightless being this like everything fits in the palm of your hand, perfect animal. I was like, I want to go total opposite. I want to spend a year in the studio, like trying everything and find a producer who is down to do that with me. So I did a bunch of research and had a bunch of conversations, and then landed on Scott Salter out of Durham, North Carolina, who's this like production engineer wizard. And we did the band sessions were mostly in this like freezing cold like garage studio in Durham, and then we did a bunch of stuff at Scott's home studio, and then I came back and did another few months of work just on my own with him, like doing all my guitars and vocals and stuff. I did some tracking in bathrooms, and like, I mean, it was just like, it was this totally drawn out process, and I learned so much during that one. But I would say it was a mixture, to answer your question. It was a mixture of like what I was drawn to, what I was into, both like as with production and like the style of music I was listening to, but also what I'd written, I felt like called for that sound, you know?
Yeah. No, it's such a great record. I mean, I love those tunes, really. It's such a strong one, like really. But yeah, like you said, the production and everything, it helps. And what's quite cool. Yeah. But
yeah. Thank you.
Becca,
Thanks for checking out all my
yeah,
stuff.
I love
nice.
that. Like I said, I stumbled upon Regina, and then I went back and I was like, damn, this is cool stuff. So, and you know, then obviously all the records that you're on as a side woman. So, but Becca, just one last question. Like, obviously the next few months are not gonna be musically involved, but like still this new record is gonna come out, and do you have some plans, like long-term plans to come to Europe again, or what are the future plans musically also?
I do. So yeah, like you said, I'll be going on maternity leave anytime as soon as tomorrow. I don't know
as soon as this talk is
when the
finished,
baby's
right?
gonna come.
Yeah.
But then yeah, we'll see. Hopefully not.
Yeah.
And then I'm gonna take a few months to get to know this new human. So around noon, I'm gonna crawl out of the woodwork, and during that time, I've set aside some very important work during my maternity leave, some very important work that can be done from home, such as finalizing the mixes and the masters and the album artwork and the liner notes and the music video and everything that is going to be nestled around this new release, which comes out August 30th. And so the singles start to drop June, July, and August. And then we will start to tour. Right now we're focusing on getting some US dates locked in the fall, followed by some European ones in the late fall. So I'll definitely keep you posted. All of that is underway.
Fantastic. Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for sharing some of these thoughts, and beautiful to hear you talk about it, and thanks.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. It was good to talk with you too.
Yeah, and thanks, Chris, for setting this one up for sending me.
Yeah, woo woo.
Yeah.
Shout out to Chris Tordini.
Yeah. But cool. Wish you all the best, and you know, with everything, and stay strong. And